I'm going to talk about the business of family-friendly mobile gaming. First, a little background on myself. I've been in the mobile gaming space for about 8 years, and in the gaming space for about 10 years. Red Games Co. is based in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we also have an office in Santa Monica, California. Over the years, we've had #1 games in 5 different categories in the app stores. We also had the #1 kids game for the better part of a year. And in my talk here, I'm going to start kind of broad and work my way down. But some of the things we're going to cover are why family-friendly is an important part of the market in a growing market segment. I'm going to cover some of the things that Jesse touched on. I thought he had a lot of great data. I'm going to probably fill in some of the areas that he didn't touch on and probably reinforce some others. What are the conflicts, or I'm sorry, what are the challenges around family-friendly gaming that are emerging around ethics, social responsibility, monetization is a big consideration here, competition. What are the opportunities and who's doing it well? And we'll have a little time for Q&A. So just as an overview, if you've been here for a few days and all of you are in the industry, I'm sure in one way or another, I'm going to cover some kind of broad level data points and work my way down to some conclusions. And so some of this information is going to be familiar to you, especially if you've been here for a few days. But obviously a big industry at large, 137 billion in the video game industry in 2018. 2.3 billion gamers, so we have a huge audience to work with. Mobile gaming representing about 70 billion, or 51% of the market. And from 2017 to 2018, the market grew 13%, which is pretty significant. And it's estimated to be at 100 billion by 2021. So another big stat that came out this year from global data, and this is purely an estimate, but the video games market could be 300 billion by 2025. So think about the market doubling in the next 6 years. So that's pretty significant as well. So in terms of the audience, just starting off with the more of the adult audience, 18 and over. On average, adults are spending about 7 hours a week playing games, up from roughly 6 hours a week last year. And you know, the biggest part of the market playing games is the 26 to 35, which is averaging about 8.5 hours. But you know, on average, adults are spending about 7 hours. So that's quite a bit of time, right? About an hour a day. So when we think about kids, so and I'm going to use the kids market a little more broad. I'm going to go all the way up to 18, and I will kind of break it down into the different segments. But if you had to guess what a let's say 5 to 8 year old is spending playing games, and I know Jesse touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to break it down in a little bit. How many hours a day would you say the average 5 to 8 year old is spending playing games? Just throw out a number. Yeah. 2 hours I'm sorry, 8 to 12 year olds are spending 2 hours a day. So if you think about adults spending 7 hours a week, think about children on the 66% of 8 to 12 year olds spending 14 hours a week playing games, and teens 13 to 17 are spending about 2.5 hours a day. So 17.5 hours a week. It's really like, you know, at that age, like a part-time job. And as you kind of go down to ages 2 to 4, you know, 21 minutes per day or 2.5 hours a week, and ages 5 to 8 is about 42 minutes per day. So almost an hour a day when you're 5 years old. And boys playing games typically more than girls, although we're starting to see those numbers level out. So it's also, you know, the industry is maturing quite a bit. Massive industry, a lot of money to be made. A lot of the consolidation has started to happen over the past few years. 25% of the companies in the space are generating 80% of the revenue. The incumbents have a lot more resources typically to spend on innovation and product development, and they have deep pockets for marketing and UA, which is, as we know, becoming the real battleground. And it's not always the product itself. In fact, if the products are equal, it's really just about the marketing and user acquisition. So But even with that consolidation and 25% of the companies controlling 80% of the market today, there's still vast opportunities. So when you talk about 2.3 billion potential customers, 28% of those under the age of 18, it creates a big opportunity as we look into the future. And it's because while a lot of the needs of the market are being met today, the market changes, and customer needs change, and they're changing now, and technology changes. You have things like government regulations. I think we heard in the last talk a little bit about some of the new things that are happening in China in terms of regulations, and it's really wiped out hundreds of small developers, but also created opportunities because they're basically, the new gaming authority has created restrictions around certain types of gameplay and restrictions around what kids are going to be allowed to play and for how long. And we're starting to see more regulation here as some of the conversations around kids and gaming are coming to the forefront of conversation. So the top companies in the space today are not guaranteed to be there tomorrow, and most certainly all of them won't be. But you can be sure that people will still be playing games. So just kind of drilling down, there are some macro trends happening with external factors that are creating opportunities, and I'm going to touch on a few of them. One that we look at is this idea of multi-generational gaming. Again, Jesse touched on this a little bit, but the idea is that we have 3 generations of gamers now. You have Gen X, Gen Y, or the millennials, and Gen Z. So Gen X, which I'm part of that generation, now has kids, and in some cases, those kids have kids. So you have a pretty big base of gamers today that have grown up playing games. Gaming has also become an accepted form of entertainment. I think this has to do with the generational groups, and adding generations of gamers, but also, you have things like esports, and you have college scholarships now for gaming. You can become a professional gamer. You have television networks dedicated to gaming. So, today, gaming is becoming, part of the culture in a way that it hasn't been in the past. And part of that is because of the accessibility. Not everybody, most people have a game that they love. Everybody has a gaming device. So mass accessibility, this sort of gaming being interwoven into our culture, and it used to be a guilty pleasure, but now it's something that has become more in the mainstream. And you have multiple generations of gamers, and so this is converging to create some opportunities. And a couple more micro trends that we see today as parents are gaming more, as gaming is more part of the news and part of the culture. Parents are starting to become more informed. When I was growing up, my parents had no idea what games I was playing. And, I would say 5 years ago, kids or parents probably didn't really understand the games that their kids were playing unless they were gamers themselves. But 92% of parents say their kids play on average an hour a day. 94% of parents are concerned about the risks of playing games. And more than 70% are worried about violence and sexual imagery in games. And there are a number of other worries that parents have, and they're growing as they're becoming more informed. And there are more and more publications, more and more research studies that are coming out that are talking about what are some of the dangers, what are some of the risks that we should be thinking about. So what does this all mean? Well, mobile gaming is becoming kind of a family affair. It's becoming part of gaming life. When you talk about kids spending 17 hours a week playing games, it becomes part of the conversation, and parents are becoming more informed because they're gamers too. It's accepted form of fun and entertainment, and families want to have shared experiences, and they want to have experiences that are appropriate. So if you're a father and you're playing games with your son, you want to have access to content that you feel is appropriate. And there are a lot of games that maybe are borderline, but there today are very few that you would consider appropriate for multi-generational gaming that's family friendly and appropriate. And more moms in particular, but parents are becoming more involved in monitoring and governing the kind of games that their kids are playing. And so when we're talking about this family-friendly market, especially a multi-generational family-friendly market that's growing, and there's a movement happening around it, what comes along with that is the social responsibility. And it becomes incumbent on the developers and the industry to start to take these parts of the business and industry seriously, and I think that's happening in a lot of ways. And I think if you use data and innovation in smart ways, it can be really good for business. And it's also probably the right thing to do if you're into that. But there's both a business opportunity and I think a social obligation as we continue to play games with our kids, monitor their content. There was a new study that came out this year called Electronic Gaming and Psychosocial Adjustment by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And it was a study with roughly 2,500 males and females ages 10 to 15 years old. And just to summarize this study, because it's a really interesting study, but it really makes it kind of simple to have some actionable things to think about and to potentially put into action. But so low levels of engagement is about 1 hour or less playing games. Mid-level is 2 hours, and high-level engagement is 3 hours or more. Now, interestingly enough, 1 hour or less had a positive impact on kids, associated with higher levels of life satisfaction, pro-social behavior, and lower amounts of externalizing or internalizing problems. So externalizing meaning forms of aggression, and internalizing meaning depression. Mid-level, which is around 2 hours, had a neutral effect. So it had no noticeable differences from players who were non-gamers, and there might be some kind of offsetting thing happening there, and they get into that in more detail. But what I thought was really interesting in particular was the higher, both 1 and 3, which is high levels of engagement, 3 hours or more, had a negative impact. Had a clear negative impact, and it was associated with low levels of life satisfaction, pro-social behavior, and higher amounts of depression and aggression. And so that's really interesting, as a parent and as game developers when we think about the kind of content that we create. And today there are hundreds, if not, maybe approaching thousands of studies, whether they're micro studies or pretty elaborate peer-reviewed studies. And there was a great article by Ronaldo Tabakin this year that took these studies and was able to aggregate those into some positive and negative effects. And I grabbed a few that I think are worth mentioning. So some of the positive effects that gaming has on kids is problem solving, hand-eye coordination, planning and resource management, multitasking, quick thinking, strategic thinking, perseverance. So these are very developmental. I think building brain muscle around these, you don't necessarily get that in physical sports, and you don't necessarily get it in school. But there are also, 25 or so negative impacts from gaming, and the amount of time you game was a big part of that as well. But also the kind of content that you're consuming when you're gaming. So a lot of the negative impacts that come from gaming were coming from content that had too much violence or too much suggestive sexual nature to them. And that can be very subtle, but some of the other things were addiction. Certain types of games, if you play them too long, can increase the amount of gray matter in a developing brain in areas that you do not want more gray matter. The reward system, if we're rewarding developing brain for things that might be antisocial or that may not be aligned with your values, you start to train the brain in ways that could be problematic and decreased academic achievement, mostly associated with too much gaming and decreased concentration. And so we start looking at the industry as massive. The kids market is big and developing. There's a huge emerging market around multi-generations trying to find ways to experience games together, family involvement, and it creates opportunities that maybe weren't as ripe as they today in the past as they are today. And that's around high quality gaming content that families can come together to have shared experiences, multi-generational content that appeals not only to the kids but also to the parents. And so we're talking about creating games that they can truly play together. And if one of the data points in the previous discussion talked about kids wanting to play games with their parents, and parents now becoming more coming back to gaming if they were gamers in the past, or some of them are becoming gamers today, are more inclined to have these shared experiences, especially because it's becoming part of our culture. But we don't have a lot of content out there that really supports this idea. But the demand is growing, and it's coming from both sides. And also just creating games that the kids will love, that gamers will love. You think about Fortnite, might be on the border of what you'd consider appropriate for family-friendly gaming. Certainly multi-generational, and I think it has a lot of really smart innovation around the way that they drive revenue. But content that gamers will love, but also that parents can endorse. One industry that's interesting as a comparable, and it's not one-to-one, and there are lots of arguments of why it isn't comparable, but there are also a lot of arguments to why it is the film industry. And if you look at the top 10 grossing games of 2018 in the film industry, they're all family friendly and they're all multi-generational. What the film business would call 4-quadrant, so mother, father, sister, brother. It's an interesting trend, and I think the opportunity exists in family-friendly, multi-generational gaming in particular, and mobile being the primary platform for that. So I'm going to give you an example. Like I said, there are some, if you go look in the top 100 grossing games in the App Store, you could point out a few. There's some great Lego products in there. There's Harry Potter. Probably the one that stands out the most in terms of innovation and capturing probably a lot of the essence that you'd be going for in multi-generational gaming is Pokemon Go. And not to beat the Pokemon Go drum, because I know that it's a pretty worn out drum, but it is a good example because of its financial success, and also because I think what it stands for and what it accomplished. 53% of the audience is women, so it has a nice balanced user base. But it also, and you don't get the under 13 because that data is not typically available, but 13 to 17 is 22%, 18 to 29, 46%, and then 30 to 50. And if you read some of the reviews and the forums where parents are talking about this game, you can see that they're both enjoying it, but they also enjoy it as a family adventure. It's something they can do together. They can also do independently and talk about their experience. It's a game that everybody can play. It encourages exercise. It creates friendly competition. Maybe some light conflict and violence, but it's very friendly, and it brings people together to have shared experiences. Another great example is what's happening with Apple and Apple Arcade. Apple, is always trying to stay a couple of steps ahead. They've seen some of the challenges in this space around monetization, but they're also listening to the demands of the parents today, which we also saw in the last talk is a huge part of what kids are, how kids game, and so Apple is responding with the Apple Arcade, and there's both what they talk about publicly, and there's also what's happening behind the scenes. So publicly, it's a subscription-based platform, so you pay a monthly fee, you get access to 100 games, all curated and approved. So as a parent, you don't have to worry about those games. They're all going to be family-friendly. And they're designed to be cross-platform, so you can play on your iPad or your iPhone or your Mac or Apple TV. So couch co-op and creating family experiences is a big part of what Apple's focused on here as a way to address this growing need in the market and this opportunity to create these shared experiences within the family environment. They appeal to all ages, cross-generational gaming. So it's something that I could play by myself or I could play with my daughter. And they're taking it a step further and really focusing on the privacy issue. So there's absolutely no tracking, no analytics, which can be also problematic in terms of creating the best experience possible. But they're really going out on the edge, trying to address some of these big concerns. So as you start thinking about content in this space, which we believe, and again, a lot of this is through us looking at the macro environment and drilling down into some of the micro trends, but what we see at Red Games as an opportunity through our filter as a business that has been focused on this space for a while, there's a huge content opportunity here, and things to consider are innovative new monetization models. The subscription-based model is a big one. You see big toy companies looking at the physical toy sale that integrates into the game, so the retail opportunity, premium packs, and premium is still interesting. And then I think there's still a lot of opportunity in the freemium market for this demographic, but maybe in different ways. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that with the fight passes and things with Fortnite. Limited, one thing to consider, it's kind of counterintuitive, but limited gameplay. If we know that 3 hours or more is going to be harmful to kids, and parents are becoming more and more aware of that, to get ahead of the curve, you might think about games that have short play sessions, play patterns that maybe encourage no more than an hour a day, and reward kids for that. And so you kind of get all your gaming in, and then you go do other things that are fun and appropriate for you. Cartoon violence, it's kind of a broad idea, but the idea is that blood and gore, no shooting people in the head and so on. And innovative uses of technology. The Pokemon Go is a great example of that, getting kids out of the house. And these are just a few high-level ideas. I'm sure that the content community is going to come up with much better ones as this market continues to grow. As a company, Red Games Co., this is something that we believe in. We have 2 games launching in September in the Apple Arcade. We have Lego Brawls, which is a multi-user battle game, and it does focus on primarily a younger demo, but it really does consider a family-friendly audience, couch co-op, or virtual multi-user play. It's a battle royale game, and it really is about fun, safe, also competitive, and we have cartoon violence in there, so you're shooting playing cards and things that I think help address some of those issues around violence. And then Super Mega Mini Party, which is a hyper-casual game. Two other trends that you see in the last couple of years are the rise of the battle royale and real-time multiplayer, as well as hyper-casual games. But Super Mega Mini Party is really about couch co-op and coming together with your family and being able to sit down on the couch and everybody on their device can have their own device, but have a collaborative play session. And I was going to touch on a couple other games we have in the market, but I think I might be running a little low on time, so I'm going to wrap it up and just open it up for Q&A. Thank you.